Hello and good evening. Today we'll be discussing as if it were 2 or 3 generations back, and exactly how it is that what took place back then now affects the world we live in today. We will try and clarify as to why those events are still affecting and perhaps hindering us even now. In this documentary, we plan to show what exactly a time flow from the late 1920s to the mid-1940s really represented. The 1930s had a different philosophy. People were much more social in America and constant experiments were taking place, like the end of the Jazz Age and its famous swingers like Duke Ellington, or the beginning of Amelia Earhart's attempt at going around the world. As these things took place in America, over in Europe, what poet William Butler Yeats called the Second Coming was beginning to be set in motion. Here's Jimmy Hawkins telling his account of what it was like in the global depression. People were simply not getting married, and a lot of ill-taken abuse was hitting the US from the Dust Bowl to the stock market crash. Still, we got by through the depression and learned to adjust to everyone's need in the community. I do remember a strong anti-Europe campaign taking place during that time, since nobody back then wanted to go back into another dangerous war. I never saw my parents until after the Great Depression. They sent me to stay with my aunt and uncle. I ended up with a low-paying job and not much of a future because of this Great Depression. I do recall one thing that certainly got me to keep going was the inspirational fireside chats that President Roosevelt nearly always held. The Great Depression was an event that hit the people the hardest in the case that the middle class had constantly used their credit cards to gain luxuries they'd never had before. Soon the debts were flooding in. This caused the stock market crash of 1929, and it's what caused America's Great Depression and our rapid descent into national crisis. We would soon withdraw from the Dawes Plan, a large loan to Germany that they would use to rebuild those around them, and the rest of the money would be used to assist the other allied nations in their recoveries. For some time it even appeared to be working. European nations were becoming democratic, and they owed us large amounts for their recovery. Japan was the only other nation left intact after World War I. France and Germany made peace and both joined the League of Nations. The Kellogg-Briand Peace Pact condemned the continuation of war. The seclusion from Europe had affected a great deal of things, least of all the social trends. The United States at the time decided that it was far too risky to continue dealing with Europe in fear of either worsening the structure of the economy or going into a new world war. It also made sure that concepts like the League of Nations formed by the United States was weak and had no actual enforcement branch to handle international distress. Although declared active since the end of World War I by the Treaty of Versailles and Americans ratifying it, the Americans were going into isolation. France and Britain, along with America's help, pulled themselves out of the situation with ideas like Roosevelt's reform ideas or New Deal policies, where people got jobs like an artist, a construction worker, or even a janitor. Strong imperialist nations like ours also chose to tax the people to try and strive out for the tough economic times and get the money to flow and keep running. For countries that couldn't rise above the economic challenge, they collapsed and were eventually taken by a new wave of fascist leaders. Adolf Hitler was taking control from Germany's Weimar Republic that had caused a massive inflation. It did not help that many Germans knew that primarily wealthy Jews ran the Weimar Republic. Rapidly, Hitler overthrew the new form of government that had been set in place after the Reich of World War I. He made promises to deal with the inferior race amongst the Germans known as Jews, and had many sent to ghettos, which then led to concentration camps. Hitler also challenged the amended alignment with France by taking over many nations surrounding it. From there, he made a secret pact with Stalin of Russia to take over Poland, and both would share it. Once this occurred, the two imperial nations closest to Germany, France and Britain, could no longer agree to simply allowing Germany the idea of an appeasement. They began to take offensive maneuvers, although they were too late for Poland, and France soon came to regret this. Quickly, I may as well add, as Hitler performed a tactic named the Blitzkrieg, in which he used armor to hit places strongly and then thus taking out many nations, including France. Pearl Harbor had recently taken place against the Hawaiian harbor where our subs and boats were located. It reportedly killed 2,000 men and dragged us into the growing war. 3 days later, Germany declared war on the United States. This all required us to prepare for the concept of a two-front war. It meant that we would have to invest and work hard on the creation of an army industrialized. It also meant that we couldn't care who made that army. African Americans were brought into the American military, which in time would assist them in the gaining of no segregation in between the ranks. This was most particularly gained by Tuskegee Airmen, who were dedicated, determined young men who enlisted to become America's first black military airmen, within a time where many people thought that black men lacked courage, skill, patriotism, and regrettably intelligence. We fought against the Japanese in the Pacific, using island hopping to our advantage. It ended poorly after continuous attempts to get them to surrender failed, and we turned to the Manhattan Project, where atom bombs were used to eliminate the the threat of American casualties. 2 were dropped in a span of 3 days on 2 individual cities. Wars were fought in fronts like North Africa, Italy, France, Germany, Normandy, and even Stalingrad. Russia's capital as Stalin and Hitler turned on one another. Fascist leaders like General Mussolini and Hideki Tojo ended up captured and killed for their acts in the war, and Stalin made the land that he conquered as part of the Red Army's lands. As for Hitler, he managed to kill himself through cyanide pills, and with the legacy of helping the genocide of 6 million Jewish people.